Man, after finishing season 1 of Arcane and subsequently season 2, what had the biggest and lasting impression on me was the relationship between Ekko and Jinx. But why though? It seemed like such a minor, borderline non-existent part of the overall Arcane storyline, and yet my mind has been consumed with thoughts on it, to the point where I gotta make this video conveying all my personal thoughts, opinions, and feelings on Ekko and Jinx's relationship. So let me preface everything I'm about to say that this is my personal interpretation of Timebomb and how I filled in the gaps that has created so many different interpretations of their relationship. Secondly, like so many Arcane fans, I have no League of Legends background, so how I filled in the gap will come from everything surrounding Arcane and nothing related to the games, ads, or other outside sources that isn't from Arcane and its surrounding media. Lastly, the way I'm looking at Jinx and Ekko's relationship is through a pro Timebomb tinted pair of glasses, so there's your bias warning, although I do believe that those lenses are the correct prescription when looking at Jinx and Ekko's relationship moving forward. Alright, so now that that's out of the way, let's talk about Timebomb and start connecting the dots that make this ship work. It all starts before the events of season 1, after the scene of the war on the bridge. Vi and Powder, along with Milo and Clagger, are in the care of Vander, who is a good friend of Benzo, who seems to be the primary guardian of our boy Ekko. These 5 children often hang out with one another, but here's where I start filling in the gaps left out from the show. We start with episode 1 and a botched heist that leaves Milo complaining about Powder's performance. He mentions that when they do jobs where Powder is absent, everything goes right. Using our time bomb goggles, when Powder isn't with her older siblings, it's safe to assume that she's with the kid closest to her in age, Ekko. Actually, we can also assume that Ekko is Powder's best friend. In fact, it isn't all assumptions, as we have several sources outside the main Arcane show that confirms that Powder is often with Ekko. A lot of this comes from the enemy music video, which is Powder's POV, showing her with Ekko, whether that be dancing, practicing their combos, or just sitting in close proximity to one another. Powder's closest bond outside of her family is Ekko. There's actually a scene in this music video where we see Ekko and Powder riding in a giant wheeled vehicle, cruising the lanes and flipping off some enforcers. It's kind of portrayed as them joyriding the stolen vehicle, but with Jinx Fixes Everything game in Act 3, we have added context behind this. Powder and Ekko actually worked on that vehicle together.
Our first prototype launched right off the ramp and into the sump. The next one we made waterproof.
This information leads us to the very little interactions we do get in the show. After the failed job, Vander inquires how they actually found the place, which Powder responds with her and Vi hearing it at Benzo's shop from Little Man. Earlier, Clagger and Milo had the same question for Vi, meaning that only Powder and Vi went to go hang out with Ekko, further solidifying how close Ekko was with the sisters, Powder in particular. Now, I'll admit these next interactions are crumbs, but they're good for further filling in the gaps. During the bar scene, when the people of the Undercity are confronting Vander about the enforcers messing around in the lanes, the camera shifts to the door behind Vander, and the kids we most see clearly are Powder and Ekko, standing next to each other. Sometime later, after Marcus gets information from Silco on Vander, he orders his goons to search the place, and before the enforcers enter the room, who do we see together again? Yes, the besties Ekko and Powder. So here's where I take some more liberties to fill in the gaps. What we see Powder and Ekko doing before the alarm goes off is taking a look at one of Powder's bombs. We know that when we first are introduced to one of Powder's gadgets, it ends up being a dud, which results in them losing the loot from the job. Powder mentions that her bombs never work during the talk with Vi after she overhears Milo talking down on her. However, the next time we see Powder talk about her bombs, she is fully confident that they will work. Now, it could have been the speech that Vi gave to her some nights earlier, or everyone getting hyped for taking on the enforcers, that motivated her to perfect her bombs. But hear me out. This small shot with her and Ekko is her coming to her engineering partner with what happened at the docks, and them brainstorming on what she can do to make the bombs work for the next time, further solidifying their bond and trust in one another. The last scene we get of Ekko and Powder interacting before the time skip is right after this, when Marcus sends his goons to search Vander's basement. Again, it's just a time bomb crumb, but when all the kids are hiding, Powder is on the brink of slipping and being discovered. You'll notice that the person who notices this first and points it out to Vi is none other than Powder's best friend Ekko, who, from what we've gathered so far, is constantly looking out for her. And that's it. That's all we get from the main show is Ekko telling Vi and Powder about Jace's lab off screen, Powder and Ekko standing next to each other and sitting next to each other during the bar search, and Ekko noticing Powder is about to fall in the same scene. Not much to work with without all the context we had to gather outside of the show, and that leads us to further fill in the gaps using outside clues, because the next time we see Ekko and Powder, now Jinx, they are enemies. So what happened in between time? So furthering my agenda, I mean interpretation of the relationship, the enemy video takes place after Powder, who is already in the care of Silco, and all the scenes outside of the bar is Powder reminiscing of her family and Ekko. While Ekko is a big part of her childhood and she remembers him fondly, what sticks out most to her is her trauma and the shots of Vi switching from a loving and caring to distant and aggressive older sister. I think it serves as a brief look at Powder's descent into Jinx that we don't get to see in the main series. I bring this up because it sheds some light on Jinx's thoughts on Ekko. That leads us into the deleted scene that was replaced by the Firelight music video of episode 7 in season 1. This scene was a flashback of Ekko during the time skip, gathering people affected by Silco's rule of the lanes and starting the Firelights. In this scene, Ekko knows that Silco has Powder and he makes an attempt to rescue her. But by that time he meets her, she tells him that she doesn't want to be saved. We can assume that he pleads with her and talks bad about Silco and addresses her as Powder, and even goes so far as to grab her by force. But Silco has already told her that everyone betrays them. Now fueled by the influence of Silco, she slaps Ekko, the same way Vi slapped her when she called her Jinx. The love and belief that Ekko always had in Powder led him to take her words for what they were. He was always serious about her, even when nobody else was. So when she told him that she isn't Powder but Jinx, he believed her. I believe this is one of the biggest reasons why Ekko is so hell-bent on thwarting Silco, because to Ekko, Silco is the cause for all the problems in his life. The death of Benzo, the worsened conditions of the lanes, and the topic of this video, turning his best friend and crush into Jinx. If he could only take down Silco, he'd be able to get Powder back. This faith that he could save Powder by taking down Silco, however, began to diminish as their run-ins with her grew worse and worse, culminating in the first scene we see of them together post time skip, episode 4 of season 1. Here, Ekko and the Firelights attack one of Silco's shipments guarded by Jinx, and we see that Ekko isn't too concerned by her. He's more focused on the mission of destroying the Shimmer aboard the aircraft. There are some more time bomb crumbs here that I've seen mentioned by others, saying that Jinx doesn't throw the first bombs at Ekko, but at his goons to the sides of him, as well as Ekko having arguably the best reaction time in the series, hesitating when he first sees her. This all changes, however, as Jinx, in a moment of confusion and grief, shoots one of the Firelights, which causes Ekko to finally lose focus and attack her. We can assume that this girl is on the same level of Scar, Ekko's right-hand man in the Firelights, and one of the top dogs, which is why I believe that this was why Ekko became so aggressive. Even so, I don't think Ekko ever gave up on Powder in his heart, so he had to constantly separate Powder from Jinx and remind himself out loud that she is Jinx and Powder is gone for good. When Ekko finally talks to Vi, he reiterates this to himself and to her that she is Jinx, asking Vi what she was doing with her, also mentioning that people change. To which he then asks if she's working for Silco, because again, every problem that he has leads back to Silco. The conversation takes him outside to where Ekko mentions again that Powder is gone and that Jinx belongs to Silco. We see that any word of Jinx or Powder from Ekko has Silco's name following closely behind it. So now let's talk about the most iconic fight scene of season 1 and what sparked mine and the majority of Timebomb enthusiasts' interest in this ship. What's crazy is the bridge scene conveyed so much to us, and yet the only words said between the two were from Jinx.
Oh, look who it is. The boy savior.
Now, here's where my big fat Naruto fan brain kicks in, because what we see is some Naruto versus Sasuke, Kakashi versus Obito like inspiration of best friends with strong bonds fighting for their lives. The fight between Ekko and Jinx shifts back and forth from past to present as Ekko invites Jinx into a game they used to play as kids. Given everything discussed so far, we have a good look on what this actually means to these two. Former best friends with mutual crushes on each other, smiling flirtatiously and giggling at each other, one last time as they begin their final dance. Ekko, with the foreshadowing of his time travel abilities, recalls how Jinx moves, always the one paying close attention to her, and gets the upper hand. Here, the most intimate stare occurs as Ekko and Jinx gaze into each other's eyes. Ekko so fixated on separating Powder from Jinx, and Jinx so fixated on separating Powder and everyone else from her, finally came to a head, as in this moment Ekko saw Powder in her eyes. Someone who he thought was gone appeared for a brief moment in front of him, and he let his guard down. On the other side, Jinx, who was trying to separate herself from everyone, just couldn't fully do it with Ekko. I think she realized his feelings for her with that look in his eyes, and her feelings for him, as she was likely filled with sorrow and regret that she was trying to kill her best friend and first love. So she gave up. She couldn't kill Powder mentally, and she likely hated herself for what she became and where it led her. The only option left was for her to take her own life. I think this act of using the bomb is what killed Ekko's faith in Powder fully. The glimpse of Powder, who briefly rose to the surface, was superseded by the actions of Jinx, which confirmed the death of Powder. Even so, using our time bomb goggles, we can speculate that Ekko went back to check on Jinx after the explosion and even tried to take her away if it wasn't for his own injuries and Silco showing up. But that's up to your own interpretation. Lastly, even without all of the context, the fight in and of itself showed subtle hints of a tragic romance, which is exactly what it was after filling in all the gaps. But let's continue. So after this, we don't get any Jinx and Ekko interactions until episode 7 of season 2. Well, technically, we don't get any Jinx and Ekko interactions until season 2, episode 9, but that's just semantics. I think the only thing to note before we discuss the absolute time bomb feast that was episode 7 of season 2 is that Jinx had become the symbol of rebellion for the Undercity, inspiring the people of Zon and even bringing the groups together, including the Firelights, who at this point believed Ekko to be dead. Additionally, the rally that brought these groups together ended up in a mass incarceration of these groups, in which Jinx herself had to break them out of prison, again including Ekko's Firelights. So now we come to arguably the most enjoyable episode of the entire series, depending on who you ask. Season 2, episode 7, Pretend Like It's the First Time. Surprisingly, I won't spend too much time here, because this is an alternate reality. The main takeaway from this episode is that Ekko, after everything we've discussed, regains his belief in the Powder Jinx of the main timeline. Several instances of this episode, Ekko treats the AU Powder as if she is his Jinx, the one that he knows from his main timeline. It's subtle, but the takeaway is that as he grows deeper feelings for AU Powder, he's doing the same for Jinx. And so now we finally come to the final episode of Arcane, and there is a lot of gaps to fill in, but I'll be honest, I don't know how to accurately do that because we are genuinely left without a lot of information. Nevertheless, I'll continue to give you guys how I filled in the missing pieces. So, after returning from the alternate universe, Ekko's first order of business is to see Jinx. Ekko left the alternate universe dressed in his coat, but when we see him meeting up with Jinx, he is back in his tank. The reason why I point this out is because it hints at Ekko likely appearing somewhere else, drops off his coat, and then goes directly to Jinx's hideout, rather than Ekko already being there from the portal. Regardless of if Ekko was already there or if he went there, he makes it just in time to save his Jinx. The first few pulls of the pin on her grenade, Jinx thinks that Ekko is just another hallucination, similar to the one she had with Silco in the cell. We see as her pupils widen that the appearance of Ekko shrinks when she realizes it's just her imagination. Except it isn't when Ekko says it's always a dance with her. This is important because we see them dancing as children and again in the AU, but this is also referencing the many other interactions they've had over the years. The deleted scenes of him coming to save her, the run-ins with Jinx and the Firelights, and the last time they saw each other on the bridge. The history runs deep, and it's enough for Jinx to momentarily give him more time to speak. So he does and says he's gonna take a seat and see if he can convince her to not blow them up. So this hits Jinx as she looks at the bomb and realizes that she does in fact care about Ekko. That fact has never changed as her bombs never seem to be meant for him. So she decides to jump this time around. Ekko then tells her about the lesson he learned from her about regardless of what happened in the past, it isn't too late to build something new and to do it for someone who is worth it. I think this is important because AU Powder asked if Ekko was trying to change her too, but he said no, he only wanted to build up what was already there. he took this same approach with his Jinx, and that seemed to work as we cut away from them further interacting with each other. The next time we see them is at the war in Noxus, and they are in similar attire with pink X's on their chest. It's interesting because the last time we see Jinx, she was already ready to leave this world, but now she is her usual self again. So what exactly happened between Jinx and Ekko, and how much time had passed for them to be together preparing for war? It's said that there's a deleted scene of Ekko telling Jinx about his trip to the alternate dimension where he built his Z drive, and he talks to her about the powder of that universe. He tells her that this powder is different and whole, and Jinx can feel the truth in his words. It's important because Ekko believes that Jinx can be whole just like AU powder, and Jinx trusts Ekko when he tells her this. This is a part of what convinces her to find a different way other than throwing her life away. This takes us to the rest of the Jinx Fixes Everything game, where we see a small glimpse of what happened after Ekko saved Jinx and before the war. Ekko took Jinx with him to the Firelight hideout, where he likely took care of her, giving her much needed food, a bath, and a place to rest. So now let's speculate on exactly how much time has passed since Ekko found Jinx and they were together at the Firelight base, as well as turning her lair into a balloon. We can get an idea of episode 8 of season 2 during the montage coinciding with Jace's rally of Piltover and Zahn. We see several different times of day. People evacuating the city, Lords training the new recruits, Gert and some Zonites deciding to join the cause, and even afterwards a brief time skip of Singe finishing Victor's transformation. I'd say at the very least there is about 2 days worth of time that Ekko and Jinx spent time together preparing for the impending war. But realistically, given the stuff that they had to build and the people they had to gather, I say it was closer to a week at the very least. That's not including Jinx getting her will to fight again. So now let's go on what we actually know in Jinx Fixes Everything Act 3, which takes place shortly after the beginning of episode 9. Hard to say how much time it took from when Jinx first arrives at the base to her working on her new weapon, but my assumption is it takes her some time to adjust to her new surroundings before she actually is ready to build her weapon. From what we gather from the game, Jinx is her old quirky self again. She's back to referring to Ekko as little man.
Benzo. And little man. Back when he was even littler.
She recalls her own personal takeaway from her fight with Ekko, saying,
"That night on the bridge. I'll never forget that look in your eyes."
And most importantly, her main reason for going to war. Past, present, and future, she's doing it for Zahn. I think given the clues from this missing portion of the show, the Arcane art book of her thoughts surrounding the Firelights, and the hourglass symbol on her balloon and arm, it's safe to assume that enough time passed between when Ekko found her and the war that she bonded with the Firelights, Ekko, and subsequently joined their cause to fight for Zahn. And so now we get to the last missing piece. A few hours before the battle, Jinx and Ekko get ready for war. What was their last moments alone together like? We have absolutely no added information on what took place other than the clues written all over their bodies. So let me again reiterate what I said at the beginning of the video. There are several interpretations of their relationship because there is so much left out, but remember to use your Timebomb goggles when filling in those holes. That's what I do. So Jinx and Ekko's story has never been about their romance. Arcane makes it clear that the focus for Jinx is her relationship with her sister, and they stood on that to the very end, all the way up until Jinx's sacrifice. The same goes for Ekko. Even in episode 7 in season 2, he's more focused on returning home and Benzo, but the romance with Powder was always there under the surface. Jinx and Ekko's romance will always be subtle because that is what the writers want to convey to us. The focus of these characters isn't romance. I say this because while the focus of their stories is on their individual goals, their romance is absolutely a part of each other's overall story. So you're damn right that what took place before the war was them intimately riding on each other, Ekko doing it more so to shower Jinx, who absolutely needed to feel loved, get that love from her man. Unfortunately, no, I don't believe that they're officially together yet, but I think they shared a long, heartfelt embrace with each other, and may have even kissed on the balloon leading into the war, which I 100% think Jinx, just like her AU version, initiated it and definitely did it when our boy Ekko was off guard. So now we're at the home stretch. The last thing I want to point out that several people have been talking about is when Jinx is in danger, Ekko immediately appears on screen to help her out. It's interesting to note that when Warwick is over Jinx, she has a bomb in her hand as a natural Jinx reaction to when she's in danger, but giving her time with Ekko doesn't pull the pin. Like I mentioned earlier, the romance between her and Ekko will always take a backseat to her relationship with Vi, and so from here, that's the last we get of Ekko and Jinx for now. The Arcane art book is sort of like the Timebomb Bible now, because if anything, it confirms everything I've said in this video thus far regarding how Jinx and Ekko feel about each other. The only question left is whether Jinx is alive or not, and if you believe in the clues that point to her still being alive, then you'll naturally come to the same conclusion from the clues I pointed out in this video that Jinx loves Ekko. So it coincides with one another, and we'll just have to wait and see where their story takes them next. Anyways, appreciate everyone who checked out this video, and also thank you if you made it to the end and listened to me finally put my thoughts into words on this. Again, this is just how I saw the show conveying the relationship to me, so I don't know, maybe I'm off or something, but regardless, I'm hoping that this tragic romance has a happy ending somewhere down the line. Until then, I'll be lurking in the Timebomb groups. Peace.